Then I would say the fundamental purpose of marketing in that context is to two things. One, to turn people into users, but two, anytime any developer anywhere thinks about X, that they think about you.
And we are live. So, welcome to another episode of SourceLife. Today, we have with us Aneel Lakhani. Aneel has been employed full time in corporate IT for a really long time and held position in software engineering, operations, product development, and marketing. He currently leverages his reach expertise in assisting early stage companies in getting to market and reaching their next stage of growth. He's also a venture partner in Crane, an active investor, a member of a board in various companies, and also Novo advisor. We also have Tomer Barnea with us, the CEO and co-founder of Novo. So, hi, Tomer. Hi, Anil. How you doing?
Hello, good. Thank you for having me. It sounds like I do too many things.
I would love if you could maybe share something surprising with our listeners about yourself. I mean, it could be a hobby, it could be anything, just like to to show people that you are an actual human being and not just working.
Yeah, sure. So most people don't know this who aren't my friends, but I'm an avid cook of Burmese.
What? Okay.
During the pandemic, I got a Burmese cookbook from my favorite Burmese restaurant in San Francisco, and I made everything in the book over and over and over again, and I got really good at it.
Okay, so diving into the depth of your expertise, the first thing that I would like maybe to start our conversation from is when talking about sales and marketing around open source, the connection of those words and the connotation is not so good per se. And that's why some people actually came with new terms like DevRels and growth. What do you think about it?
Okay, so I'm old, which is to say I've been in tech for a very long time, and I'm not, and you're right, and I'm not a banana. Shout out to the guys from Nucleo. So my views on this are that someone has to do the function that we call marketing, or we call DevRel, or we call growth, or we call whatever, which is there are people out there who don't know about the thing you've built, and you want them to know about the thing you've built because it solves some problem they have, or makes something they do better or easier, or makes their life improved in some way. The process of figuring out how to do that, that's what marketing is. So I don't really care what you call it. I also don't care who does it. But someone's got to do that thing, or else no one's going to hear about what you've built, and they're not going to use it, and it's not going to grow, and it's not going to have an impact on the world. On the flip side, if you want to build something that's sustained and sustainable, people have to work on it. And generally speaking, you'll need some people who work on it full time. Those people will tend to have some basic needs in life, such as housing, food, clothing. If they have family, they need to feed their kids, they need medical insurance, etc. So somehow money has to get to them for the work that they do. And that usually happens through what we call sales. But sales doesn't have to be a human being calling on someone asking them for money. Sales can be someone using a product and choosing to buy it online. It could be any number of things, but money somehow has to change hands for the people who work on the thing that's improving the world full time to live. So that's the sales part. So I don't think these things are inherently opposed or in opposition to the way open source works. I do think a lot of people who work on open source have psychological hangups with the words marketing and sales that aren't related to the reality of the fact that people need to know about your thing in order for it to have an impact. And the people who work on the thing full time probably need to receive money in order to have food and shelter.
So one of the things that I really hear a lot from different marketers that I tend to listen to and read their books, Seth Godin, for example, one of the better things that I hear all the time is that um, things that are worth sharing, those are the things that you need to keep on doubling on them, and like the word will spread eventually, and eventually someone need to take it and spread it out and share it with the world. And yeah, that's what marketing is for. Eventually it's that. So but right now I actually would like to maybe do a deep dive into more a niche kind of area in marketing, which is marketing to developers. So basically, marketing efforts to developers could be slightly different because targeting and persuading this persona, which could come up as a bit more sophisticated. It's a bit more, let's say, complicated in in a really surf term. But how is marketing to developers should or does it need to be different than marketing to, let's say, regular people, and what the message should be?
Yeah, I mean, I. There are ways in which it's very same. It's very much the same as marketing anything to anybody, and there are ways in which it's very much different. In my experience, as someone who has been a developer and as someone who has participated in building products that are sold to developers or they're made for developers, even if the developer doesn't buy them, but the end user is a developer. What I found is that you still need to provide a reason for the developer to engage, for the person, the human being. They have to look at what you have and say, okay, there's something useful there, or something interesting, or something I think will make my work better, or my day better, or this thing I'm trying to accomplish better, or will reduce the time I spend wasting on stuff I don't like. Right? You have to find something that they like that you talk to them about. I think where the difference lies is in most other marketing, there is an explicit sales message that's associated with the marketing, right? I'm marketing this, I'm telling you about this thing because I want you to buy it, right? And that's true in most marketing. Marketing to developers is not that generally does not work. It is not. I am telling you about the advances of my IDE plugin because I want you to spend $15 a month on it per person. I am the reason I'm telling you about this thing is because it's useful and you're going to like it, and that doesn't come with a purchase requirement, right? Like that, the purchase part is totally separated out from the know about it part, the learn about it part, that it helps you part. Whereas in most other marketing, like when you're selling a CRM, right? Everyone knows, no one's confused about the fact that you intend to make money, and in order for people to use it, they have to give you money, and they're only going to get to use it for 2 weeks or 1 week or for 30 days for 5 people, and then they have to give you money, and that's just how it is. With most dev tools, especially open source ones, there is always a you can use this, you can get something out of it for free forever component. That's generally true, and the purchasing is totally separate from the marketing and the getting value and the using.
So I definitely agree. I mean, I think in a lot of situations, you as the site or the who's going to provide the service usually kind of tend to tell the persona why they're here and why they want to buy it. For the engineer, you'd most likely show them why are they here and why they want the value. You wouldn't tell them why they want to buy it. It's they don't care about buying. They care about value. They care about not wasting time. They care about best practices in code. They care about their career path. They care about learning about new problems. They care about a lot of different stuff, but they don't really care about buying. Um, and then the other thing, which I kind of feel it's a lot of time when companies try to market to developers, Um, assuming that, and in most cases, companies like that, usually one of the founders are engineers by trade. And what happens is, instead of market to developers and they would like to get market by themselves, what happens is they learn from the other rims how you should market, and then they copycat sales type of marketing, and then they try to apply it to engineer. Now, what happens here? There's two major flaws. A, it doesn't work for engineers usually, and even if it would, you actually don't have the necessary experience to be able to perform it well because you just copycat from someone else. And so that kind of tend to be the way a lot of companies market to engineers, not due to their fault. It's just there's a lot of experience lacking here. It's kind of a new niche, only for a couple of years now. But yeah, I think it's an interesting topic because engineers just view the world a bit differently. Not necessarily, I wouldn't say differently than regular people. They are regular people. It's just the way they perceive value it's a bit different.
Yeah, I mean there are two things that you said there that are I think super interesting. One, uh, partially the thing that happens is that at least in building tools for a fundamental developer as a user audience, um, that person is typically not also the purchaser, right? So there's a separation between the person who uses and gets the most value and the person who makes a purchasing decision. And the person who makes a purchasing decision may care about different things than the person who's using, which is one of the reasons that marketing and sales are not the same thing for a developer audience, and why it might make sense to have developer relations or developer advocacy and no marketing, right? And have the selling process be a totally different thing that's done differently, engineered differently, and worked differently. The other thing you pointed out that I think is super interesting is that developers are actually still human beings, right? It's there are things that apply to humans that also apply to developers, which is that yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't, as a human being, you have limited attention, you have limited time. You can't know everything all the time. You can't be everywhere all the time, and you can't, be attending to everything all the time. So, like you need help, just like a person does, to figuring out what's important, what you should pay attention to, what's valuable, what's like worth taking 30 minutes to try out. If the decision maker is a developer, and that means if the developer is involved in the sales process, they have to have easy access to all the information and all the specs, metrics, whatever that are required to justify the purchase, right? And it has to be in their hands. So even if the developer is not the purchaser, because they are the decider, they participate in the process, and you have to involve them appropriately in that process.
Um, so yeah, Anil, could you maybe elaborate a bit more why you, I mean, your view and why you're skeptical about PLG?
Yeah. So PLG is another way of saying my cost or effort of customer acquisition is essentially zero or minimal because no human beings are involved. Because what happens is that a user uses my product, and through some fact that's intrinsic to the way the product works or intrinsic to the way the job is, they other people get exposed to the product, and other people start using the product. And that's not just other people in that person's team, it's other people in their company, and then it's other people outside of the company. There's something specific to the product itself that causes growth and causes spread. And no person that you employ and spend money on has to do anything. So that happens. extremely rarely.
Okay, now I think that's taking it to the max. Now, obviously, there are some odd use case when everything what you just said kind of checks out. I think most commonly looking into product-led growth is the company does need to invest money into the marketing perspective. That's definitely. But looking into how the sales cycle works and how the expansion within the company works. And yes, in a lot of cases, actually, expansion into other accounts, a lot of this could be done potentially using the product, omitting a lot of the traditional sales cycles. A lot of the, I mean, I was just, talk, I think it was last week, something like that. And in a lot of the cases, when you look into more traditional sales cycles company, you would prevent the user of actually seeing the product, because if you wouldn't prevent them to see the product, you wouldn't be able to learn what is the actual value you as a company are able to give them, which means you aren't able to actually price it correctly for them. Now, that is the opposite way of how PLG view the world, right? PLG says, you know what? Our model are transparent, quote unquote. Now, it's not necessarily transparent for every single scale, but it is for the 90% of the generic users. Everything could ultimately be done by those numbers. It's built to sustain growth, which means you don't need every single time to showcase a demo, calculate the value, blah, 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 blah. You just give the product. The product is able to block features based on different personas, different use cases, in order to create this expansion of that account. And a lot of the time, and that's kind of a different subject, but a lot of those projects could potentially introduce the flywheel effect, which means they're going to introduce the way for the product to market itself into other places. Now, that one I definitely agree is the most trickiest part, because a lot of PLG product aren't built to have that, right? I mean, if you're a PLG CRM, it's going to be significantly harder to convince someone to send something to another person with your company logo on it. Right? It's not necessarily built within the product. And so you can kind of spoof that, you can kind of mimic that, but it's not really part of your product. Um, so I'm not as skeptical as Anil about PLG. With that in mind, I think a lot of the companies that do PLG aren't really doing PLG. They're just saying we're doing PLG. It's just like creating an open source SDK and saying you're an open source company.
What you'll find is that most companies that make the claim of product-led growth, or say that they're bottoms up, or whatever to that effect, usually that's a way to bootstrap exposure. Effectively, it's a way to do marketing. And then there's a sales team that does traditional selling into an organization, and that's how they actually make money.
Okay, so kind of navigating the conversation back to the more related topic of this particular episode. I would like, Anil, maybe if, like, based on your previous experience with other companies, what were the best marketing channel that actually worked for you?
Yeah. Something that works surprisingly well pre-COVID, maybe post-COVID, if there is such a thing as post-COVID, is was was events. And my reasoning there is that sometimes the fastest way to expose the largest audience to what you do is in a physical location where there are a lot of people who are there for that reason, right? To be exposed to a certain set of topics or to a certain set of technologies. There are right and wrong ways to do this, or better or worse ways to do this, but it is a very fast way to get a large amount of exposure. And then the other one is actually quite challenging, which is the world of developers is quite fragmented. It's not a uniform, homogenous, single segment of people, right? Like different developer communities are organized around languages, they organize around frameworks, they organize around um, subject areas like databases versus uh, front end design versus cloud infrastructure versus whatever, right? And all these groups, you can find them in different places, and sometimes they all overlap. Let's say everybody overlaps on Hacker News or Reddit, but then all those things have their own sub channels and subgroups. So what is the community of developers is itself quite fragmented, and there's no such thing as like one good channel. It's more about finding all the pockets where there are people who care about the thing you do, and then being present in those places. And that might be, one or two places, or it might be 30 places. Part of the challenge of marketing to developers is figuring out what all those places are, and then being present. It's actually just a lot of work. It's manual labor. There's no automation here, right, that will help you figure this out and do it for you. It's just work.
So there are two main things here. First of all, I would like to kind of dig deeper into the events part, which I don't have too much personal experience there with events, but I would love to kind of deep dive into why do you think events tend to work so good for individuals who you would usually, if you'd kind of try and call them, it's unlikely they would answer, and if they would, it's unlikely you would get more than 5 seconds.
Before you will answer that, Neil, could you also kind of also mention if it's like more of a meetups or a like big conference or maybe a workshop that you're talking about?
Every kind of event, but it relates to my how I'm going to respond to Tomer's question. It is specifically in situations where you need to show people something, right? Where words are insufficient, where explaining it doesn't work, where where you need to optimize for people seeing what you do and seeing it at scale. Events are very good at that because people tend to be, say whatever, you've got a little booth at some conference, and you're in the hallway or whatever. If there's something on a screen, if there's something on a big screen that's clearly relevant to someone's interests, they will notice and they will stop. That's basically guaranteed. And so this is where developers are humans, and you're working with the human, right? If there's something like, if I'm someone who really cares about data streaming, and you've got a graphic showing data streaming and a pub sub thing, and there's some Kafka in there, and it's writing to like something that I recognize, I'm gonna stop just long enough for you to get 5 words out. And if you choose the right 5 words, then I'll give you 30 seconds. And the only way to maximize this process is at an event with a bunch of people.
Yeah, because if you were to, if I were the same engineer, right, interested in whatever databases, and you would call me, and I would see it's kind of, an unrecognized number, and then say, "Hey, I'm calling from MongoDB." My first instinct would be, I don't want that. Please hang up the phone. I mean, and that's even in a subject I'm very much familiar with, and it is my forte. I would be happy to answer the phone after I engage that over MongoDB website. But even then, I mean, developers, I think, are one of the hardest personas to try and sell something without them actually touching that, which means doing demos to developers usually tend to not work because they are extremely skeptical. They're extremely value driven. If you give them the code, they will just read the code.
So for a company, for a solution or a service company, especially open source, to be in like a part of the infrastructure, it's something that we are aiming a lot, especially here in Novo, because we are, as an infrastructure solution and not so trivial to replace part, we kind of trying to put an emphasis on that when we uh, show what the project does. But currently, we don't generate any revenue out of it. But going through your post and something that you wrote some time ago, I think it called Marketing 101 for Engineers in the post series that you wrote in Medium. The fundamental purpose of marketing is to turn people into customers. But what should the open source company measure or focus their marketing efforts on? And I mean, what is? I hope that my questions came out clear, and if not, I could elaborate more. But what just we should focus on as a open source company that's not really concentrating on revenue right now?
Yeah, then I would say the fundamental purpose of marketing in that context is to two things. One, to turn people into users, but two, to anytime any developer anywhere thinks about X, that they think about you. So in Novu's case, anytime any developer who has to deal with notifications in any way, shape, or form, Novu comes to mind, right? That's what you want.
Okay, so shifting gears to a bit of a different topic, you are an active investor in Crane, and you led a few rounds for different companies. Could you maybe share with us what you're looking at before you investing, and what made you, in particular, maybe invest in Novu?
Sure. So there are things that just apply across the board, whether open source or not open source. Like, and for Crane specifically, because we have our own specific style and methodology, one thing that we really care about is founders having personal experience with the problem they're solving. So they have deep empathy for the users that they're building for. Another is that there is the potential of a large growing market, right? It's hard to want to invest in something where the market is small and finite, and you know that it's a zero sum game. Ideally, you want to participate in non zero sum games. That's the best case scenario. That means everyone gets to win. And then for open source specifically, there's actually a slightly bigger challenge for open source founders than for non-open source founders, which is figuring out this dynamic between users and customers and who decides and who doesn't decide about a purchase, and when do you make something be a purchase. What parts are for free? What's open source? What's not open source? Is everything open source all the time and free forever? And you only buy, if you want to integrate with Active Directory or whatever, right? Like where these lines are, these boundaries, there's no set pattern. There are ways that other people have succeeded in the past, and for instance, there are ways that people do things in the world of databases which seems to work. There are ways that people do things with IDE integrations and plugins, which seems to work. And there are ways that people do things with operating systems that seems to work. And there are ways that people do things with schedulers or Kubernetes or the world of Kubernetes, which seems to work. But there's no absolute fixed pattern about what the right way is to commercialize, where you put the boundaries, what's free, what's not free, what license you use, what constitutes tiers of a commercial offer. There's no fixed pattern. So the harder thing with open source companies and a hurdle for open source founders, or the way I think about open source founders, is, do those people, the specific founders, do they have the perseverance and the just like flexibility or the desire to figure it out, right? You will find if you talk to enough open source founders over a long enough time period that many of them don't want to figure these things out. They don't enjoy it. It's not fun. What they really just want to do is build a thing they're building the way they want to build it. What they don't want to do is run a company. And running a company means figuring all these things out, right? They don't, and not even run a company. They don't want to run a movement. They don't want to build a community. They don't actually care whether people use their thing or not. They just want to build their thing, right? And they don't want to do any of this other work, which is figuring out the answers to these questions for their specific project with their specific community in their specific world. They don't enjoy that work, and they don't want to do it. And that can be actually challenging to figure out ahead of time, right? As an investor and also as a founder, you might not know that you don't want to do all those things. You might think you really want to do all those things, and you get 6 months or 12 months into it, and you really hate doing all those things. And it's very hard to know that about someone before they've done it and before they're in the process.
So I will ask you another question, but I mean, and do you feel like that's kind of the problem of founders, or in that regard, I would say entrepreneurs? And the reason I'm saying that is because founder kind of puts this crazy allure where it's a founder, it's fun. No, being an entrepreneur is a job. You need to master it, just like any other person master the job. And do you feel like those entrepreneurs just are usually kind of first timers who kind of dream what's going to be those hurdles about figuring out monetization and company building, or is it applies to more seasoned founders specifically due to the open source nature?
I will say that um, this is more true than not for people who are first time entrepreneurs. But the challenge is harder in open source than it is in closed source or obviously commercial enterprises. And second or third time founders also sometimes have the same problem, because it's really less about, I guess it's less about any of these things and more about the psychology of the people and whether or not they want to solve these problems, and how determined they are, right? Like if your determination is, I as a person want to build something that a lot of people use and changes the way something works, changes the way notifications work in your instance or whatever. Am I determined? Am I sufficiently determined that the discomfort of doing things I don't like or don't know how to do, or that are challenging, don't matter? That I'm just going to keep going, right? That I'm going to figure it out. That I'm not going to hit a point where I say, listen, I hate figuring out how to do sales, so I'm just not going to do it ever. Or I don't like talking to hundreds of people and getting told no, or getting told my project sucks, or getting told that I'm describing it badly, in order to get to the place where I finally figure out how to talk about it in a way that other people get and that makes sense to them. If those things are going to dissuade you, or they're going to prevent you from proceeding, then you're not sufficiently determined, and you don't want that goal badly enough. But oftentimes you don't know that ahead of time.
I would actually mutate this sentence just slightly. So first of all, before doing that, I would say, to some extent, to some of those chores or some of those tasks that could be classified as chores, you can ultimately hire someone to help you with. And in a lot of those cases, you can not necessarily hire, and I would actually highly say you shouldn't hire someone to do that for the first time, because you should be able to figure it out and then to super scale that with hiring. um, but a lot of cases, just like I would say, sales, or I would say, I don't know, administration, which is kind of tend to be one of the pet peeves for a lot of entrepreneurs because it's not fun. I would try and encourage you to find a way as to how to make it, at least internally, something that is a challenge, because entrepreneurs love challenges. And once you classify it as a challenge, it becomes significantly easier to do, even if it's at the end of the day it's just chores. And now, for me, I would say we are doing right now our SOC 2 compliance, and when we started doing that, the company who told us about it said, so usually when doing that with small companies, they takes about 2 months. I was like, that's going to take me 3 weeks. And then I ended up in two. And that's mostly, it's mostly documentation. I don't enjoy that. But once I classified it as a challenge, I had to figure it out quickly. And so that's for me kind of a tactic to solve that.
Yeah, I mean, what? So the thing is, whatever it takes, I agree with you that you can ultimately hire people to help you do these things, but you really have to be willing to do them yourself, at least in the beginning, because how are you going to know whether the person you hire is doing a good job if you haven't figured it out? Yeah.
Um, okay, so we actually kind of stepped into a really interesting realm of discussion, but unfortunately, we will need to kind of wrap this up. Anil, maybe for closing words, could you maybe briefly share maybe some advice for early entrepreneurs, founders, or it could be a book, it could be anything that just pops into your head?
I would say that, one, you really have to want to do the thing you're doing. Your reason for doing it shouldn't be, I want to get rich, or I want to be as good as my neighbor who built a successful company, or whatever. You should really want to solve the problem. It helps if you have some grievance with the world. That's motivating, right? That tends to be motivating. But the but the thing that should drive you is that you want to solve the problem, because then you'll be focused on solving the problem, and a lot of other things won't prevent you from solving that problem, right? You're going to solve the problem no matter what. And then the second thing is the flip side of that, which is, if it turns out you really don't want to do it, just stop doing it, right? Like, go do something you want to do. Like, don't, like, it's, you have one life, don't waste it.
Right. It's actually
Love that.
it's actually a great advice. Yeah. So
Love
thank
that.
you so much, Anil. Thank you so much, Tomer, for joining for another episode. And I really hope you guys enjoyed as much as me. And I believe that our listeners also learned a lot and got really many insights out of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me.